mean, there's been a lot made of the ability of to sequester emissions in forests and soils. I think there's no question that you can do that, but it is a temporary solution because eventually it is all released. So it may be able to buy you some time in the short term, but it's not the answer because it all comes out again, and in fact you really have to find ways to reduce emissions at the source. So America in particular, but also Canada and Australia and a couple of other countries have spent a lot of effort to make sure that carbon sequestration is included in any global regime and is included in any national regime. And I think it's legitimate, but you have to know it for what it is. And so when I see people saying this is the answer, it makes me shudder because it isn't the answer. But is it something that people should do for some period of time while we try to get the rest of our ducks in a row? I think the answer is it's useful.
In the various large uses of energy, such as space heating, transportation, industrial production, and so on, where do you see the biggest opportunities for savings of energy in the near future? Is that clear, or does that just have to be done a little bit everywhere?
Well, I think you have to do some everywhere. Transportation is about a third of the problem. I don't think there can be a solution without dealing with transportation. Power generation is about 35 to 40% of the problem. That has to obviously be a part of the solution. Buildings and so on are sort of the other piece of this, and there are technologies that we know very well in that sector that we ought to be able to do, but that are in many cases cost competitive. So I'm sorry, the answer is you have to do it all. Yes?
The carbon sequestration isn't a long-term strategy. Does that mean that we eventually have to move towards zero emissions for those resources?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I don't know, it's zero. It's probably not zero, but it's close. Yeah, we do. I'm sorry, the question was, carbon sequestration is not the answer. Does that mean we have to move towards zero emissions? And I think carbon sequestration clearly is not the answer, but it can be a transition. And yes, we do have to move to, I don't know, zero, but look, I mean, we have to really dramatically lower our emissions, dramatically. But it buys you some time with carbon sequestration.
The legislation related to SUVs and light trucks and reducing their miles per gallon, that was unsuccessful. What makes you think that the current legislation will be successful, and what kind of time frame do you give it?
Let's see. I think something like the Byrd-Stevens bill, which doesn't require a lot of action, but it does make you think about where you're going and plot out a strategy. It probably has a very good chance of passage in the Senate, and maybe even in the House. A lot depends on how the politics play out over the next 18 months. Before the events of September 11, I would say that many people in the House in particular would feel that in order to be reelected, they would have to do something on the environment, and this might be the kind of thing, on this issue even, because it's been so central in the press over the last 6 months, that kind of thing I think has a very good chance of passage. I think even under the current circumstances has a fair chance of passage. I think something like the four-pollutant bill that's being considered by Senator Jeffries' committee, the Environment and Public Works Committee, has a chance of being passed in the Senate, no chance right now of being passed in the House, maybe before 2004. I think there's a possibility. A lot of electric utilities would like such a bill, and when you have industry asking for legislation like this, I think you have a better chance at it. Something like what Senators McCain and Lieberman are trying to construct is going to take much longer. It's more complicated than this economy-wide. But I think think they're going to make a fair start at it, and maybe that's in 2004 or later. So I mean, I think there also is a fair amount of attempt to try to close the SUV loophole for automobiles, although the House passed a nothing cafe bill, and so I think the odds are not very good, despite some bipartisan support for something along those lines. And Senator Feinstein and Snow and the senator trying to move something forward, but I think the odds aren't very good. Yes.
You said that you have eventually cleaner production, newer technology.
I'm sorry, I should have asked you first.
No. Here. You said a lot of things about having eventually cleaner production and newer technologies to help with this problem. What are some examples of things that might be, and also you spoke a lot about corporations doing their part and states and nations doing their part. What are some things that we can do, like everyday things?
Now I've forgotten what the first question was. I apologize.
The newer technology.
Oh, the newer technology. I mean, I think you have to look at things like fuel cells, which are being developed for cars, which there also are stationary versions. If we can get the technology right and the prices down, those would be terrific in dealing with this issue. And it's probably a 10, 15-year sort of bargain, but it's something you can move ahead with. I think a lot of the companies that I deal with are starting to bet on hydrogen as being the fuel of the future. Starting to make some pretty serious investments in hydrogen. That's a very long-term process because you have to change the infrastructure and you have to do a whole lot of things to get there. So that's maybe a 30 or 40-year thing, but you better start now, otherwise you won't be ready in 30 or 40 years. So, I mean, there are some things. In the shorter term, in some places, wind is competitive, and I think you see a lot of wind going up in certain parts of the country. It's not competitive everywhere, but it is in some places. That's a plus. If you move to natural gas from coal, natural gas is still a fossil fuel, but it's so much better in terms of the greenhouse effect that would be a fair transition. And it would be desirable, from my point of view, that most of the new power plants that are being built, or the ones that replace some of the existing coal-fired plants, are gas, because that's a really good interim step, and it really does result in emissions reductions. What are some things you can do? Well, I think when you buy a car, it makes a huge difference what kind of a car you buy. When you buy a washing machine, it makes a huge difference. When you buy a computer, there's no excuse for not buying an Energy Star computer or a television or something like that. So there are lots of things that people can do. I think it's interesting that people think that somebody else will solve this problem or industry will solve this problem. They don't actually have a role to play in it, but actually have a huge role to play in it in terms of what they purchase and what they demand from companies.
We had a question over here. Could you tell us what types of issues you foresee standing in the way of a new industrial revolution of sustainable products?
All the people who are vested in the existing structure. Sorry, you want more than that? I mean, people who are heavily invested in the current way of doing things are not likely to say, well, let's just toss all this out and go to something else. And so, for example, you have a lot of people in the coal industry who would like very much not to see people move from coal to natural gas or towards something else. Now, I will tell you that I actually have a coal company as part of my group because they have figured out that coal is not going to be there forever, and they'd like to be doing something different, and they'd like to find a way to do it, but that's one out of many, and it's only one. So, I mean, people who are vested in the existing system and who don't see the private sector ways to make money in the new system yet are going to oppose action. And actually, they've been very effective to date.
Yes, along those lines, people who are heavily invested in fossil fuel industry. I don't want to be politically incorrect and criticize our leaders right now, but aren't they a driving force behind not facing the reality of what's happening with global warming and our overuse of fossil fuels? And I just fear what's happening in the world right now, that there might be a push to try to convince the population of the United States that we have to go all out to continue to mine coal and drill for oil and be further in the hole. How would you respond to that? Without criticizing our president. You can criticize him if you like.
I'm sorry, I understand the bounds of my answer here. I mean, coal right now is a very cheap energy source. Until other things are cost competitive or there are requirements that you move away, it is very unlikely to see us move away from coal in a significant way. I would have said about a year ago that there was going to be a pretty significant shift to natural gas. Then we had some issues with natural gas prices in the West. I'm going to come down and sort of stabilize a little bit, so I think you actually may be able to move more to gas and away from coal. But I think the market won't do it by itself because coal remains very cheap. And that's why I think it's sort of interesting that we have people like Senator Byrd, and no one is more vested in coal than the state of West Virginia, except maybe the state of Wyoming. Actually realizing that this is a significant issue and you have to do it and you have to move away from coal. So I think it's a matter of time. On oil, I think it is really interesting that some of the companies that are doing the most on this issue are oil companies, and that's BP and Shell. And I think they just don't see themselves as oil companies, they see themselves as energy companies, and they're starting to make really significant investments in things like hydrogen, or ways of sort of moving in the future. And I think the challenge is to capitalize on that and push it. There actually is significant interest. Now, not all oil companies are there. I mean, Exxon thinks the science is not there, and quite honestly, they would much rather keep the status quo for as long as possible. But you do have some huge oil companies that are really starting to turn themselves around, and we have to find a way to make sure that keeps up and that happens. How the events of 2 weeks ago impact on this, I haven't a clue, honestly.
How do the companies that you work with feel about taxes versus subsidies as a way of moving us forward? What is your opinion on the proposals?
All the companies I work with have sort of accepted the idea of what I would call a cap and trade program to cap emissions at a certain level of emissions trading, which will raise the price and in some ways function like a tax. So we at least are very forthcoming about asking for rational, sensible regulation. And they are all there. It actually didn't take as long as I thought it would for them to sort of get in this position. And they're in that position partly because as they start to do it themselves and reduce their own emissions, it is in their interest for their competition to do the same. And so you're starting to see a real split in the business community of those who are starting to move forward and want everyone else to be there. And I think that'll make the difference. Subsidies, sure. I mean, the people who have new technologies would like them to be subsidized so they can sort of get on the market and start getting into some kind of sort of diffusion mode. On the other hand, I think you're going to see some amount of that. I think there will be things like tax credits for fuel cells and things like that. That's probably useful as a way to get them moving. So I won't say they don't want subsidies of some sort, but I think what is interesting is that they're fully prepared to be regulated. Taxes are just so hard politically in the United States. I mean, we could talk about it.
There was the discussion before about carbon taxes and then combined with some kind of credit in terms of income tax and the impact.
Right, tax shift. Yeah, but I think the chances of getting an would be great if it would happen, but I think it's a political matter. I don't see it.
I was just wondering, could you tell me a bit more about the reaction of developing countries to the Kyoto Protocol? You said that 180 countries came together. What reaction was developing countries to the process that's going on today?
Well, without being too cynical, the developing countries are quite happy to have the developed countries reduce their emissions. And I think it is fair for that to be the case. Nothing in the Kyoto Protocol specifically requires developing countries to do anything. So in a sense, they can be very supportive without actually having to take on any obligations themselves. They also see some of the provisions of the Kyoto Protocol as helping to spur some investments, because there are some mechanisms there that allow developed countries to do projects in developing countries, which would result in reduced emissions and then have a sharing of the credits. So there are some incentives for developing countries to participate, and they have done that. Nobody has come to grips with how you move past the developed countries do it only into how you move forward, because the developing countries will have to find ways of having cleaner development. And nobody has even confronted the issue and said, how do you do this next? Everybody's very focused on just doing this little piece of it, which has not been easy either. So that's why I said I don't think you can find a global solution here until you actually figure out how to deal with everyone in the world.
There's a question here.
I understand the catastrophic effects of climate change and on the planet and on population electricity. Was there any research proving that current global warming is not also a trend? Ice age, trend that's not to stop this year?
I'm not a scientist. There are some in the room, but I think part of the warming may have been from natural causes and natural variability, but I think most atmospheric scientists believe very strongly that a significant portion of it is human-induced, and that is the portion that we can actually do something about.